999 is a piece of shit. John Hillcoat is honestly one of my favorite directors working right now. I think that his past body of work is pretty solid. But 999 is everything that those movies aren't. It's loud, dumb, uninspired, and cliched. The movie is full of shitty performances, including Kate Winslet giving an unconvincing Russian accent, and Woody Harrelson. Well, but credit where credit is due, most of the performances actually aren't that bad. Chiwetel Ejiofor makes one of the most cliched crime movie backgrounds actually somewhat relevant and believable. It's really hard not to root for Casey Affleck. Norman Reedus and Aaron Paul are also really good with the limited screen time that they have. But Jesus fucking Christ, the script is bad. Nothing about the movie has any of John Hillcoat's signature style. Even Atticus Ross's score is kind of forgettable. As the movie goes on, the characters get stupider and stupider, and any interesting ideas are just thrown out the window in exchange for a shitty ripoff of stuff other crime movies have done better. The worst part is, in order to explain how bad the movie is, I'm going to have to go over it in detail. So that means I'm going to spoil the whole movie starting in 3, 2... The movie opens up with a heist scene that's actually kind of well shot. Hillcoat actually takes a lot of influence from Michael Mann's Heat, and even a little bit of the Friends of Eddie Coyle. There's actually a lot of interesting use of color in this opening scene, one of which is already spoiled in the film's fucking poster. You're also going to have to accept that the characters in this are stupider than your average movie thief. If I could describe this opening scene, it's essentially Grand Theft Auto the movie, without the characters blindly murdering and shooting people for no reason. That comes later. The whole escape from the bank scene is still kind of well done, but it's actually the first point in the movie when you realize this is no John Hillcoat movie, because when the camera keeps cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting like it's fucking Tumblr to different angles, combined with an irrational amount of shaky cam, your movie's probably going to start feeling more like a Tony Scott or Joe Carnahan movie. After the heist, the movie takes a little bit of time to establish that the characters are all your crime movie cliches. And as soon as Woody Harrelson shows up,
be careful what you Insta-Google tweet page.
The movie gets a whole lot better and a whole lot worse. But then there's Kate Winslet, or as I like to call her in this movie, the walking stereotype. Honestly, she is a Russian Jewish gangster who runs a kosher meat factory as a cover for her crime operation, and she always wears the biggest fucking Star of David around her neck at all times. This is almost some Breakfast at Tiffany's level bullshit right here. Also, the walking stereotype sister is Wonder Woman, even though the two of them do not look alike at all. And then Casey Affleck shows up, and he's partnered up with Anthony Mackie, who is a detective, and also one of the robbers from the beginning of the movie. And he left the fucking red paint from the heist on his shoes, because apparently he forgot to change them like a dumb idiot. I mean, the movie already reveals that he helped rob the bank, because they literally show him taking off his mask earlier in the movie, so what is the point of having him do something this stupid? I mean, everyone else in the heist is already shown changing their clothes right afterwards, including him, so why could he not change his shoes, especially since he was probably caught on camera wearing said shoes. So the two of them go to this Mexican neighborhood that's run by some cartel leader or something, the movie never really explains it. And they're there to investigate this murder that involves someone finding these severed heads on a hood that looks like it's actually kind of interesting. And so Casey Affleck starts looking around the area for potential witnesses, and then he tries to fucking arrest this one guy because he gets a little bit too close to him, and at this point even Falcon realizes how much of a fucking dumbass he is. It's at this point that I realized how ironic the movie's tagline is. The code on the street is never black and white, but the movie insists on having a black and white morality and never trying to paint any of the characters as actual three-dimensional human beings with interesting moral codes. So then Chiwetel Ejiofor learns that he has to pull another heist for Kate Winslet, and in order to further convince the gang, she ends up killing Daryl from The Walking Dead. But his whole death scene is one of the stupidest fucking things on the planet. They leave him in the driver's seat and crashes him into the middle of a wall while the gang is in the middle of an apparently secret meeting. Could he not struggle? I mean, he could more or less talk when they see him, and he doesn't really have duct tape on his mouth. And we even see the fucking car drive away that presumably has the people that set him up like that in the first place. But how could the gang not hear that? I mean, they're literally just around the corner from this. I mean, you'd think that they'd be more cautious about this kind of stuff. Honestly, these people are just the worst. And so after this scene, the movie continues and the pacing actually gets worse. Did they do this just so they could keep the movie's pace going? For one thing, the movie has a very inconsistent speed when it comes to moving its story along. For example, as I just mentioned, it breezes over any consequence of a major character's death, and yet it spends an entire 10-minute set piece on chasing down a lead that has nothing to do with the main story at hand. And so the gang gets to planning the heist, and this is where the movie essentially just folds in on itself like a fucking black hole. So the gang plans to initiate the 999 protocol, which essentially means them killing a cop, thus distracting all of the cops so they could plan their heist uninterrupted. With their inconsistent moral codes, are so dedicated to killing a cop that they never really stop to do anything interesting with this entire concept, considering that half of the freaking team is in the police force. There is that clip in the trailer of Clifton Collins essentially going,
Boy, I do a cop just like
and that's essentially the code that the team lives on for the rest of the movie. I mean, they couldn't do anything interesting with the moral complications that come with having to do this, and the logical complications are numerous, to say the least. And I mean, do they really even have to kill a cop in the first place? For one thing, Anthony Mackie gets shot at the end, and he survives, more on that later, and the 999 is still pulled. Yet everyone is just so intent on killing someone. I mean, could they not just purposely injure a cop who is in on it? I mean, for one thing, they could just pay Anthony Mackie or Clifton Collins a lot more of the money that they get from the heist. Or why not find an abandoned building or clear out a building in a highly populated area and blow it up, thus bringing all of the cops there as a sort of response to something that's probably even bigger than a cop dying. And I mean, if you say that it's because they can't afford it, they can fucking afford it. At the end, Chiwetel Ejiofor blows up Kate Winslet and the explosion is pretty big. So why could he not use that bomb? Was he specifically saving it for Kate Winslet? Honestly, fuck this movie. So later, there is this raid scene in which Casey Affleck and Anthony Mackie chase a tail that has a very loose connection to the main plot of the movie, and the plot of this scene is stretched so goddamn thin, yet it's one of the scenes where you can tell John Hillcoat was actually putting some sort of effort into it to actually make sure it feels interesting and unique, and yet it feels like it belongs in a different movie. Despite that, a lot of it still feels kind of off. For one thing, why wasn't anyone suspicious of the people who were randomly following them on the side of the streets? Or what kind of angry crowd throws yellow and magenta paint at a police car for no discernible reason? So towards the end of the movie, Anthony Mackie leads Casey Affleck into the shadiest fucking abandoned building on the planet, and Casey Affleck doesn't bat an eye when he sees someone from the cartel sleeping on the floor, and then Aaron Paul shows up and shoots Anthony Mackie, triggering the 999. Oh wow. Who could have seen that coming? So after Anthony Mackie and Aaron Paul shoot each other, Casey Affleck checks on Aaron Paul before his freaking partner, who also seems like he probably had a worse injury than him. Then the rest of the team pulls the heist, and nothing about it is ever really explained. They never explain who or what is being robbed or what they are stealing, and their getaway van isn't even bulletproof. I mean, they had one at the beginning of the movie, I mean, it might be because they rented it or it was Norman Reedus's, but if they had a budget set aside, why couldn't they rent it again? Is it because Norman Reedus was alive? Was it because it was his van? If it was, why couldn't his brother just give it to them? I mean, they shun Aaron Paul for being weird, but having a bulletproof van to get away seems like it's a lot more risky. And the last 10 minutes of the movie blatantly rip off The Departed in the most obvious way imaginable. And if you don't realize this and you've seen The Departed, what the fuck is wrong with you? And the movie ends on the stupidest fucking freeze frame of Woody Harrelson smiling, even though Woody Harrelson barely contributes anything to the overall plot of the movie. 999 is obviously one of the worst movies I've seen this year so far. The movie just does not work as a whole and feels like a bunch of other movies smashed together. I still believe John Hillcoat is capable of a good movie, but he really fucked up on this one. And so did everyone involved in making the movie. And so did I for giving them money. 4 out of 10.